Seeing that we have a quorum, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Finance Committee meeting for the 21st of February, 4 o'clock. First order of business, any public comment by anybody? Absolutely.
Thank you. My name is Ian Golden.
So Ian, why don't you just come and
Thank you.
talk into the microphone since...
So I apologize I wasn't here the other day. I have the Article 71 that you discussed.
Yep.
And so I watched the first part when you approved, and then I didn't get to watch the second part in its entirety where I called it back and decided to take no action. So, and I know that one issue was how much it was going to cost. And so I don't know if you had this printout from the DPW. And I'm not sure that I made enough copies there, but
No.
yeah, thank you. But so my understanding from Rob Neal is that is basically that would be how to get it all up and running and using thermoplastic paint, which lasts for between 3 to 5 to 10 years, depending on how heavily trafficked a road or path is. So it would be significantly less in the subsequent years. And it's also been pointed out to me that under the recreation capacity of CPC to fund projects, that this might be, if it was approved going forward, open to CPC funding or other funding. When I was last before you, I apologize for not having more of a handle on costs. And so Harvey Young and I have gone down every bike path on the island, and we're in the middle of making sort of these spreadsheets for every bike path.
It's a real spreadsheet.
I haven't seen it counted.
Paper like this.
Well, Excel is not my strong point. You get the point, right? That we're determined to have it. And
Yeah.
and the and we've also been discussing on DPEC, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, possibly to take out the driveways from this article, not in terms of the right of way, but in terms of putting signs, and so that should make a significant difference to the cost. And so I'm wondering whether or not you might consider reopening the issue.
Sure. Let me just, since you didn't see the back end of the, or
No,
word here for the
I
tape.
didn't, unfortunately. Sorry.
So we did not see the breakdown, but we did have the $80,000
Right,
number.
right.
So, and I think where we got to after a conversation was as much about, and I think it's not that people have a problem with doing this. I mean, anybody who rides a bike knows
Right,
the
right.
seriousness with which this is being put forth. But approaching this, in two ways. One was through the bike group, and I know you were meeting yesterday. I think you were
Right.
meeting yesterday.
We did.
And the second was to take a risk-based approach to putting out the signs. So that, there are obviously parts of the island where the risk is greater without signage than there
Right.
are on the bike paths than where there aren't. And I think we were when we had this discussion, persuaded by town administration that this probably done that way could fit into the budget of the DPW,
Yeah.
and it could be rolled out,
Right.
particularly if you did it on a risk-based approach and
Right.
tried to,
Right.
instead of trying to do the whole program. Off of that, that's why we ended up saying, take no action, not that we don't think it's a good idea, but that thought that perhaps there was another way to get to the end goal in a more financially accommodating fashion, which is really what it amounts to.
Well, I think then we're all on the same page, really, with that, because we all want to improve the safety and keep the costs down, not add to people's workloads. So I think, you know, the article will be modified before coming to town floor, but I don't intend to withdraw it. And I don't think that would be a good thing to withdraw it at this point. And so I'm wondering how I could modify it, or how we could discuss it at BPAC, where you might consider supporting it rather than no action, I guess, is my question to you all. So, because I think, you know, obviously you draw weight at town meeting, and, you know, so it would be awkward.
Any thoughts or comments?
I, just like anything, I mean, somebody wanted money for mosquitoes, so they stand up at town meeting. It's not like we say we don't sponsor.
Yeah.
It's always the funding source. So that's just the avenue we usually tell people to take. You know.
I mean, I personally, I'm not sure changing to support it if it's got if it's an article with money attached to it, but I could see, you know, if you and McNeil or whomever, your group, got together with a program, you know, reiterating that it's worthy of support and the town ought to be doing that.
Right.
Whether there's things that you could do to persuade us to, with an $80,000 price tag, I'm not sure that, you know, we would necessarily go to supporting the article. We're not going to oppose the article, and so you shouldn't take no action as, although some people do, as opposition to the article.
Right. Well, thank you for that reassurance. And so, is there, in other words, you know, I would hope that this would be something that CPC would fund. For instance, you know, I'm on CPC,
Yeah.
But I'm only one of 7 or 9 people. But this would seem to me that this would be a natural fit for CPC. But I guess my question is, if you approved and it was passed, would you feel, under the town protocol, would it have to be funded right away, or is it something that it can be deferred until the funding can be found? Or
I'd have to defer to our experts over. Oh.
The money doesn't necessarily have to be available. I mean, available. It's not. What am I trying to say? It's not necessarily kind of time frame. And right now, I don't know if you saw the draft comments, but the draft FinCom comment says basically that while there's no action, I think it's no action,
Right.
but that the committee recommends that the Public Works Director get together with DPAC and prioritize the crossings that if signage would be appropriate and funded within current funding.
I hadn't seen it.
Yeah.
So that was the comment that I sent to you. And there were other issues about enforcement.
Right.
But the main thing about the signage, I think, is that if there are areas that can be funded within existing funding, that can be done.
Well, we're trying to put together a list, and in particular about where we consider the most important crossings to be funded. So, okay. Well,
So that's where we got to,
Yeah.
which was, think about it in a risk basis, work with the DPW. There was support to try to get the signage out. It is a public safety
Yeah.
issue, and
well, great. Well, thank you for taking the time to explain to me.
thank you
this.
for coming.
And I'll grab that if I may, since that represents work.
And
All right. Thank you.
great. Okay, I think we already approved the minutes yesterday. So, the main, our main business today is to hear from about the Article 18, which is the Nantucket Inn property at 1-3 Miller Lane, and then we're going to go through that, and then we're going to catch up on Article 37, which is the article that's sponsored by Tobias, citizens article. And he, I hope, is going to where's Tobias living? There he is over there. Take us through his updated financials. And then the balance of the meeting is basically for us to have a discussion. And within reason, I invite anybody in the public to participate, and I say within reason, just so that we don't have people running long and that everybody gets to participate. Mr. Atherton.
Again, my name is Rick Atherton. I didn't hear the whole prior discussion with Ian about the issue. I just, if you think it's a good idea, I think you ought to find a way to say yes and recommend it and say we'll get the funding worked out over time. Because I think your tone when you say pass over the article or not to recommend it, whatever, sets a negative tone that I didn't hear you say in the conversation here. So I'd ask you to reconsider that motion and make it more positive in some way. So the townspeople, when they go to the town meeting, understand what we're really trying to accomplish. It isn't just a matter of whether we spend $80,000 in the first month. It's a matter of whether it's a good program. And I think you folks could be helpful that way. Thanks for taking the comment.
Thank you. Okay. Tucker? And I think, did we get live here?
We're live. So
All right.
I don't know if you guys want to
Orient?
some of you anyway.
I came in and they were all lined up. This is one little sad seat here. Now this is the good seat.
So, Tucker Holland, housing specialist for the town. Wanted to thank the Finance Committee for the opportunity to speak with you today about this opportunity, which basically came to the town in recent weeks. This is the Nantucket Inn property located at 1 to 3 Millers Lane. This was really brought to us with the thought that it might lend itself, at least in part, to helping the town and community address its housing crisis. And so we're fortunate to have with us here today Kevin McGuire, who is a developer consultant. His work is actually being sponsored by Mass Housing Partnership for us in helping to analyze the opportunity, particularly from the housing standpoint. And so he'll be taking you all through shortly a look at how we might think about the housing opportunity as it relates to this property. I think I would be remiss not to say up front here how we value this project as a whole to our community. If it just was resting on housing, it certainly isn't the least expensive way to address our problem. But as Kevin will get into, this property has other assets which may lend themselves to other uses that as a community we decide are important in the total picture. So I'm going to turn it over momentarily to Kevin. I wanted to mention that we also have in the room Scott Thomas, who's the general manager of the inn and has been since almost its original inception in '89. So he is here to answer any sort of historical or operational questions and so forth as well. Brian Sullivan is representing the owner of the property and brought this opportunity to the town's attention, as well. Brooke Moore, who's the vice chair of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, is here, and I'm happy to participate. in questions and answers after Kevin's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So my name's Kevin McGuire, and as Tucker said, I am here to, I spent the last period of time really taking a look at Nantucket Inn as a housing opportunity for the island. There's some familiar faces. I was involved in the development of Sageman's Path, so familiar with the island and some of the challenges. I'm going to stand up here just so I can run the projector. So let me just ask: there was a presentation that people received, probably really dense. Probably just got it, wasn't able to absorb it. Okay, good, perfect. That's exactly where we want to be. There's a large spreadsheet. Okay, what I'm trying to do is strictly looking at the housing. Try and boil this down to, what is the cost to develop housing here, and then what is the opportunity cost of not developing housing here. So essentially, if we had to go someplace else to try and develop SHI units, how does that cost compare with what we can reasonably project for the Nantucket Inn? Okay, I've run 4 scenarios. Things start to get complicated quickly, and I don't want to get completely bogged down. So what's in front of you is a very daunting spreadsheet which shows you some numbers for different scenarios, which I will ultimately get to after kind of quickly going through. I'm shooting for 10 minutes. Does that sound about right? Great. 10 minutes to kind of take you through the logic and then hopefully have some discussion on the findings, okay? So as Tucker said, not the least expensive option for developing affordable housing. Ideally, you want the parcel that the town has bought, where the infrastructure is there. You go out for RFP, you bring in a private partner or a private entity, and they bring lots of debt and equity, and it doesn't cost the town that much, okay? But as I've looked at it, I'm not sure it's the worst opportunity. I'm not sure how far off it is relative to, good way to open. I'm not sure how far off it is from what it would cost in other scenarios. And again, cost versus opportunity cost. So let's run through again. I think you've all walked the property. So
Pretty much everybody has.
everyone's familiar with its location and its context. The real goal, as it was articulated, one of the unique things about the inn is that we're talking about 300 square foot rooms, and there's 100 of them, and so you either have like an efficiency, or you combine them to create 600 square foot, 1, possibly 2 bedrooms, okay? And that use obviously isn't a family use, and so I think it was well articulated that this is really an interesting opportunity for people that are coming to the island that are trying to take a step up on the housing ladder. Whether they're individuals or couples, this is that would be that opportunity. So it is meant to be kind of a small unit development, because that's naturally what it is right now. The existing asset, 3.67 acres, and I've tried to divide it into kind of 3 conceptual clusters, okay? The front cluster in red is really the reception point. It's kind of the administrative center and the amenity center of the inn right now. So I think everybody knows that. The middle cluster is where the 100 units are, the 100 rental units. Again, average just under 300 square feet. The rear is actually the largest parcel of those 3, and has some seasonal housing as well as tennis courts and pool. Again, all which function together. Our challenge is to kind of disaggregate those parts and kind of understand what would the relative values be, and then does it make sense to try and address the housing. So again, the front building, about 24,000 square feet, lots of different banquet, bar, the housing parcel, 2 stories, open, walkway, really nicely furnished rooms, beautiful courtyards, but it's it's a hotel room. The rear parcel, tennis courts, outdoor swimming pool, and as I said, some seasonal housing for the employees. This is the summary of the 4 analyses that I've done. And I don't necessarily want to get into it right now, but I just want to kind of describe what my analyses were. So we have 100 300 square foot rooms, okay? The first analysis was, okay, let's combine them into 600 square foot apartments, 1 or 2 bedrooms. That would be 50 units. And let's assume we want all 50 of those to be rental, to go on to the SHI inventory. And let's try and leverage as much state and outside money as possible. And let's run some numbers. Scenario number 2, the current use includes some TSA rooms. And so there's a lot of potential value both to the airport, to the TSA, but also potential revenue and value for that use. So let's take a look at 39 rental units in 2 of the 3 clusters, and let's take the smallest cluster and look at 10 TSA units plus 11 additional units, which would remain again, the smaller 300 square foot for that use would remain, or would be available for contractor, expanded TSA. We really maintain that use, okay? Again, going out to the state, trying to leverage as much money as possible. Scenario 3 is, instead of going out to the state, which carries increased cost and much less flexibility, perhaps we can think about those 39 SHI units as workforce units, okay? So as opposed to renting, let's say for $900, you could price them at 120% of median income, and that 1 bedroom you could rent for, $1,900. And if that's part of the market, and we think that that would be accepted, there may be a way to accomplish the same development, but without bringing in all of the requirements, permanent deed writers, syndicators, lots of other parts that come with public finance. And then the third option was, all of that was limited to the yellow area. Third option was, let's assume we take the back and we try and build 30 units on top of it. We're really going to look at how do we maximize the number of units. And so that's 80 SHI units, 30 newly constructed, 50 which are renovated. So those are the scenarios. Assumptions. Acquisition price, $27 million. Okay. This is a number, again, I'm not sure how formally the property is out and being offered, but this is the number that we've been working with. Number 2, front parcel, I'm going to make the assumption that the value of the front parcel is $12 million, $500 a square foot for that use, because it's not a housing use. It can go to a lot of different places, so I'm not going to assume that the housing is going to carry that burden, okay? That is an absolutely critical assumption to be verified, okay? Because if that's low, if that's high or low, that changes the amount of that gets allocated to the housing. Middle parcel, again, we're dividing into clusters as I described. Rear, we talked about. Assuming that there's the existing permitting, particularly for the existing hospitality use, there aren't huge complications in the permitting. Again, we're trying to maximize SHI. We talked about existing rooms. Again, another assumption to be verified. $150,000 a unit of renovation costs associated with putting the rooms together, okay? Really important it gets verified, because the key question here is, what type of life safety code requirements are triggered if this goes forward, okay? You can walk into those units right now and they're completely habitable, but they have very, very outdated life safety systems. It's really just a heat sensor that goes to a audible alarm and potentially connects back to the fire department. I'm not sure about that. But if you bring the state in, for certain, they're going to require that that gets completely overhauled and brought up to the most current code, which gets very complicated very quickly. Roofs come down, et cetera, et cetera. So, my $150,000 is is an attempt to just kind of be a middle ground of we know some work needs to be done, but it does need to be verified. Okay. When we maintain an existing room at 300 square feet, I've assumed that $15,000 of capital renovation takes place. We'll have to deal with management office. Again, as it currently functions, all the management takes place in the front. And that we'll be able to deal with the parking needs, which again are pretty well laid out, just given the use as the hotel. Okay, so as I run through this, the summary on analysis 1, 50 SHI units, that works out to a density of about 32 dwelling units per acre, which is pretty dense. Again, they're small units, and you can kind of walk through this, the location, so you can get a sense of a feel for what it is. The TDC, the total development cost per 50 units, is about a little over $500,000, $572,000, and the town portion of that would be 17.7 million. Okay, 62%. 30% picked up by the state, and that would be about $350,000 per SHI unit. Okay. Again, some analysis, more analysis, summary, which we'll get into. Analysis 2, we look at the TSA rooms, and essentially what happens is the TSA generates anticipate about $5 million of debt. So that's great. We're charging more, less money for the town because debt's coming in. The problem is if we're doing state financing, there's less cost upon which you're able to draw state funds. So there's a little seesaw that goes on. And the summary is town is at 14 million, or 54% of the total development cost, $360 per SHI unit. So it's actually up from 354 in scenario 1, but essentially the same. Numbers, analysis, summary, option 3, okay? Workforce. So no state money. You can get it done faster, lower hard costs, lower costs in general, higher debt. No cost, again, we're assuming no cost from the rear parcel. Very key item, flexibility. Again, no permanent deed rider from the state, which means that if, in the future, the use, whatever the use may be, can be contemplated because it's really under local control. All right. So again, the issue here is, or the functional reality here is, with the rents, which I have, again, 120% AMI, about 18, let's see, studio 1860, one bedroom 2170. I need these to be calibrated by people on the island, and 80%, 1200 for studio, 1400, 1450 for one bedroom. Again, that has the net effect of generating additional debt. And so the state, the total town requirement is 12.2 million. So that's down from 14. $312 per SHI unit. Fewer SHI units, we're only at 39, but less per unit. Maintaining the TSA use and flexibility. Analysis 4, okay, we look at the rear parcel. Long story short, town in for 21.3 million. Number goes up because we're building 30 new units of ground up construction, demolishing the pool, the tennis court, etc. But with 80 units, the town dollar per SHI is down to 275, roughly 275. So on $1 per SHI, this actually is the least cost option. But again, really because we have a lot more cost in general. So that least total cost, least cost per SHI, okay? This is all in the matrix. These numbers as far as what the per unit SHI is and what the town portion is versus the state. And so trying to compare between scenarios is certainly doable and can be done, lots of different numbers. So let me just make some observations. Really a rare opportunity. Water and sewer is absolutely critical if you're going to do any multifamily housing, okay? And so you've got a location where you have water and sewer, you have the physical infrastructure of the roads, living space, parking, access roads, and uniquely with these varied uses, you have potential other opportunities that the town could take advantage of for the front parcel or the rear parcel. Again, opportunity cost, the range of the town dollar per SHI, $280,000 to $360,000. Okay. The estimated amount that so subsidy is broken down into two categories. So it's really generated by two categories: the cost of the land and the cost of the construction. Okay. So if you have a parcel, for example, like Satcham's Path, where it was town owned and there was zero cost for land, the subsidy is a lot lower because you're not factoring that into the per unit cost. So when we're trying to look at what does this compare to other opportunities, we've got to look at, what other opportunities are there for free land versus what other opportunities are there when there's not free land. Okay. So that 280 to 360 is a combination of what can you buy land for per unit and what's the construction cost versus the rent and the debt that you can raise. Different time frames depending on the scenarios you take. At the end of the day, when you do these things, it's ultimately you have absolutely got to do it right. That is management options. What is the name of the person who's actually managing? The town should probably absolutely not manage this, either on the development side or the rental side. I've seen too many examples where that leads to really, really bad situations. State money, great leverage. You're getting money less that you have to pay, requires time and patience. Challenges: availability of state funds. Obviously, everyone's making a big push on the island. When you're going for state money, such as Six Fairgrounds will be, you start competing with yourself at the state level for money. And so you have to sit down with your political delegation, make sure you're communicating with the state, and things are going to kind of get sequenced. You're definitely not going to get two projects funded in the same year. It's doubtful you'll get projects funded in subsequent years. So there may be a year in between as the state takes its scarce resources and expends it around the Commonwealth. Development entity, control. If you're using state funds, we're using a tool or financing mechanism called tax credits. That requires a syndicator, an independent development entity, limited dividend, sole purpose. It gets very technical. I think the main takeaway is the syndicator absolutely controls the terms of the financing, and the state absolutely controls the terms of what gets built to what standard and for who. And so again, that's least flexibility. Hard cost verification, as I mentioned. So in trying to think about opportunity cost, I was just trying to put some numbers together that somehow could help you make a decision. Because ultimately, I don't know the island numbers. Everybody, the resources are here to understand the island numbers. So again, what is the land cost for permitted lots with infrastructure? So we know that in our analysis, if we use one type of tax credit, we're ultimately paying $150,000 plus the land cost. So 150 is the development cost, a write down the development cost. The more complicated, more in demand method of getting money, which is how you get 80 units, reduces the land cost to $80,000 per unit. Dollars per SHI, depending on the scenarios, we're between 200 and 260. And if you exclude the land, you're between 80 and 150. Okay. So again, in real estate terms, it's if I'm going to buy a piece of land, how many units can I build? What's the infrastructure to make it a buildable lot? And what's the cost per unit to be able to do that? Okay. I know in Boston, for example, we're buying land at $125,000 a unit. I can't imagine what it is on the island, particularly that has infrastructure and gives you the opportunity to bring 40 to 80 units onto your SHI. Maybe there's other opportunities out there, but that's in a lot of ways what makes this unique. Cost of alternative options. So if you think about kind of let's buy down, someone's building some new units and we're going to buy those down. The 80% sales prices from Satham's Path, for example, take a 2-bedroom, was $275,000. Okay, and if you take the subsidy of what would be required at the Nantucket Inn, I'm saying let's assume $335,000. The market price would be $610,000 per unit. Okay, so again, the question on the opportunity cost is: can you go out and buy units at or below $610,000? If you can, then that's a better use of your money than the Nantucket Inn. If you can't, the Nantucket Inn presents a real opportunity. $625 for a 3-bedroom, $575 for a 1-bedroom. Again, analysis. I've hit all of these. This is the crazy matrix you have in front of you. This is essentially like a master's level course that you've had about 12 minutes to absorb. Okay, so I'm happy to answer whatever questions you may have. I realize that was a quick presentation. I believe that you have that. Here I am.
I'm very fascinated with the $12 million valuation you put on the front building.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain where that came from and what you see the use for?
So I'm not an appraiser and I'm not a real estate agent on the island. We had, in conversations between Tucker, myself, and other people that Tucker was talking to, we ascribed the value of $500 a square foot. Okay, so what's the replacement cost? Let's assume it's $500 a square foot. Again, it's to some extent arbitrary, to some extent thoughtful. So that's why I put that as kind of a number one value. You need to establish that value so that you can isolate the housing costs. Okay.
It seems to me the least variable has to be that number.
Absolutely.
So I kind of look at this and say it all doesn't mean anything unless we have a more solid number.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. No, I agreed. Okay, because that assumption dictates everything. All right, and I'm not suggesting that that gets sold and there's a valuation, or gets used by a different town use, or all those are possible. Just like the Fairgrounds Road has where we are today, and now the fire station, and hopefully soon some housing. There may be multiple uses on the parcel, But I had to do that just to be able to get an accurate number for the housing piece.
I understand, I just think everybody has to understand that that's critical to the entire discussion.
Number one verification
Yeah.
is that. Number two, hard cost, but that's number one.
So that's not based on any comps.
It is, it's some discussions. I didn't do a comp analysis. Okay. But again, if there's, realtors, on the island, in the room, within phone distance.
One just stood up.
Phone a friend.
So I'm happy to, it's obviously a very difficult building to comp because there aren't many 20,000 square foot.
Could you just introduce yourself?
Yeah.
So that,
My name is Brian Sullivan. I'm a real estate broker at Fisher Real Estate. The comp conversation becomes a difficult one when you look at a property like this because there aren't many 20,000 square foot buildings that are built to a commercial code and grade to go out and look to draw linear comparisons. The closest property that has sold in the general vicinity of the area that would be straight up land cost was at the end of Old South Road. People may remember it as the old FedEx office. That property sold for $3.5 million almost a year ago this month.
What was the size of that parcel line?
It was 0.78 of an acre. So if you were to look at that as the improved structure value, recognizing that the value of that structure was not what this is, it was $650 a foot. I think the $500 number, if you were to go out and get per square foot in whole general contractors on the island for a residential build, that would be an appropriate number to put on a residential construction cost. I don't know that that's a realistic commercial grade cost or applying the procurement needs and prevailing wage that the town would need to do. And I believe that you guys have looked at more of those contracts than I have, so I would kind of throw that back to what does it take?
Let me ask you a question. How much kind of demand is there for 20,000 square foot location? I'm sorry. What kind of demand is there for a 20,000 square foot location outside of town? I mean, have you had people knock at your door and say, I'm looking for something like that?
No, because the zoning on most of the island, that there aren't enough aggregate pieces of land big enough that those opportunities exist in general. So most people, I think, to think of the projects that I've seen in the last 10 years come along would be the grocery store conversation at Valero's, the Richmond development project. There was a couple of storage facilities that got built. If you want to put that comp in, that one's kind of difficult to look at because actually there wasn't that much business being sold in that. It was the potential of business, but there was a $28 million sale on a storage facility that may have had the same amount of square footage, and those were just cubicle units.
What was you have to look at the return on the property. You're buying business there, an ongoing business against
Right,
buying an empty building.
but in that business, the contracts weren't in place. It was really just the potential of the business and the existing structure in that deal.
Yeah, but there's no potential for a business here.
Not as well, depending on how the town looks to use it, but the next person that may come along as a potential buyer may see that as it's commercially zoned. It has the opportunity to be used in a commercial manner for a variety of types of business in the CN zoning.
I'm just very concerned that we even go any further in this discussion until we have a harder number. And I just don't think this number is real.
So do we know the number that it per square foot of what it's taking to build next door at prevailing wage? I think that's a good application.
But it's only good, Brian, if you have something that would go in there. You know what I'm saying? I look at it, I see a school, school's not gonna pay $500 a square foot. I don't see there's a lot of things that can go in there. If somebody wants to knock the building down and put something else there, they're gonna spend $12,000 to knock the building down and then spend another $20,000 to build a new facility? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think.
Million, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. You lost me there.
1,000 would be a good deal. No.
Well, I think the conversation needs to go is what's the intended use of the community of that space, right?
That becomes a different discussion, exactly.
Right. And so to take that out, break out the segment. So I think you're here to talk specifically about the back portion of the residential component.
But the residential component is totally dependent on the money based on this analysis.
My analysis assumes that it's $12 million
Right.
for
That's
equivalent
okay.
value.
Yes, go ahead. Okay,
I think we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good with me.
Could you, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I
Good,
saw rents up to
guys.
$2,000.
Guys.
Is that
Sorry to, hold.
Well, did I see rents of $2,000 for?
Yeah,
for a
so
unit?
that was kind of what would be the market rent for, you know, a rehabilitated, you know, 1 or 2 bedroom apartment on the island.
The number was 2,500.
Okay, so we're renting these for affordability, so that's not the price, or we're just using what we're using those numbers for, or that is the affordable rental?
There's a scenario, so there's different levels of affordability. To get state money, everything is restricted to 60% of median income or below. Okay, so that 1 bedroom is, let's say, $1,300. Okay, or the 2 bedroom is $1,500. We were using a scenario whereby the covenant program standard, which takes you up to 150% of median income, where you could essentially tier the units between someone making 150% of median. So again, for, you know, it's hard. It's a small unit, but for a family of 4, that would be 1.5 times, you know, 100. So it's, you know, an individual or family making $150,000. 120% of median would take that down, and so those are higher rents, higher debt. So you're exactly right. Those are you guys have to answer the question.
I'm just trying to find out if we're going to use those as numbers to pay off the debt. Then we have to know what we're going to charge for rent. So I guess we're just.
Yeah, absolutely. I you know, it's same thing. It's,
the idea is to make it affordable. So.
Right, but
That's right.
I think what you're saying is in that scenario, those rents are higher because we don't take any state money. In the scenario where we take the state money, the rents are lower. I'm not sure I would deem that as affordable either, but I get.
That's the theory, right? The theory is if it's $2,500, are there people that, you know, that could really benefit from, you know, $2,100 or $1,900 or $1,700, and is that deemed affordable? You know, to be honest with you, there's about 4 towns in the state I can think of, or maybe 2 islands and 2 towns. So that's a question of whether or not that is deemed to be, you know, a reasonable, affordable use. It's a very good point.
I have a question about the timeline.
Yep.
So on this little chart, the shortest amount of time for the development is the one where we don't take the state money, but the rest of them are all roughly 5 years.
Yeah.
So how does that impact the shy list? Right, because the units don't get counted against the shy list until they're at a certain point.
That's right. So they, you know, rental units, you know, my understanding is rental units, when they are permitted, although this would be a LIP, which I think may be building permit, so it would be, let's say, 18 months less than the numbers that I put there. It's still a long period of time. The 60 months was the assumption that you get the most competitive, you know, state funding. And then I think it's 50 months if you just go through a normal cycle. That's what these things take, unfortunately.
So, Tucker, the question for you then really is how does that impact our ability to control that list if we did a project like this?
So just to go back to answer your prior question, the triggering mechanism for something where we would be taking state money, like utilizing the tax credit program, it's the award of that tax credit that is the triggering mechanism for the units being eligible to go on the SHI list.
Okay.
So
in this current scenario, what is the estimated time frame before something like this would impact the shy list?
Let's assume that it's 15 months prior to completion, 16 months prior to completion. So it's still, you know, a long period of time.
At least 3 years, really.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking.
That's right. That's right.
3 years before any of these units would impact the shy list.
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to be clear on that.
Let's be absolutely clear.
Yep.
Okay. That's the process it takes.
Yep. No, that's.
And again, you know, just a reminder, it's what's the other opportunity? Because that process is, going to take that same period of time. It's not this specific project that's making that long. It's just the process.
But Kevin, would it be, if we were not utilizing the state program, then you could be moving more quickly?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Significant, like half of that, less than half of that.
Thank you.
Kevin or Tucker, can you talk a little bit more about the opportunity cost comparisons that you did in terms of, I'm not sure, your numbers here basically say, depending on the financing structure, whether you use public funds or private funds, it's sort of $250 to $360 or $70,000 per shy unit. And then here you were comparing it to, like, the market prices at the bottom. That's Sachem's Path numbers. Those are the.
No, what I was doing here is I was trying to say, okay, let an 80% for sale. So if you were going to buy, someone's developing, whatever, 10, for sale units, and you say, I'm going to buy one. I'd like to write it down. For it to count towards SHI, it needs to be 80%.
Right.
So those are those top sale prices. Okay, $275, let's say, for a 2-bedroom. The point I'm trying to make is, if my math is correct, and again, there's plenty of assumptions in there, you would need to buy that unit. The break even on buying that unit between the Nantucket Inn and buying this particular unit is a price point of $610. Because if you put $610, if it costs $610, and you put the $335 into the write down, you put that in for that unit, that will take you down to the $275. Does that make sense?
Not sure I follow what the write down part is.
As a builder, I'm not going to sell you something I built for $275. I'm going to say, look, this cost me $610, or with my profit and all the effort, it cost me $610,000. That's the sale price. So town, I will sell that to you, or I will allow you to put a deed restriction on it, but you need to pay me $335,000. And that number is derived by, the total cost. Part of it is going to be from the sale price, the affordable sale price.
Right. Well, in that case, that's sort of the subsidy, right? I mean, you're taking a market price, 610, and subsidizing it down to the DACD price, which is the 275.
That's exactly right. And the term that I use as a write down is kind of an industry term, which means you're making something cheaper by putting money into it. So that's exactly right.
But what I'm trying to wrap my mind around is, if the town is going to put capital to work to produce affordable units, your model says it's $250 to $350 per unit. Looking at the Nantucket Inn, maybe that considered the other alternative, that's worth the town investing.
And I think that's the point. Again, there's a lot here. I think my point is there's some key assumptions which need to be verified. But people are gonna, I think the reaction to this is, you're buying this for $27 million. You're crazy to get 50 units, and they do the math and they say that's absolutely nuts. And all I'm trying to do is say, let's get a little bit more sophisticated and try and carve out and really understand what the housing portion is. And if that's the case, is $335 a good alternative? So just because I know the Sachem's numbers really well, the town subsidy per unit was roughly $100,000. Okay, but there was no land cost. So what would that parcel on Surfside and the fairgrounds have cost? That's the other key question. Again, I don't know if anyone wants to speak to land cost per unit on the island, but that's my point is, I think you may be right.
Well, the other thing I'm going through, and again, still trying to wrap my mind around this, is taking Peter's point. Well, let's say the 12 million is wrong. Let's say it's 6 million.
Yeah.
So then your 360 goes to
a lot higher,
500 or whatever.
Doesn't make sense.
Is that well? Or does it? I mean, I don't know. I mean, because
I would have
to build new on Nantucket plus land cost is going to be $600,000 or $700,000 or $800,000 a unit. So at some point, if the town wants to invest in affordable housing,
Not for one.
all I'm saying is, what is the right,
A
how
good
much can we afford to
right.
spend?
One of the byproducts of this exercise is it would be good to have a common language of what is the opportunity cost? What does it take to build one of these units? It's tricky because you're getting all types of different scenarios, right? Land without infrastructure, free land. But for conversation purposes, if people could agree on this is our cost, obviously this analysis would be a lot more helpful because you could say over under.
Can I just go back? I'm going to kind of ask a question.
Sure.
But to go back to what Joe originally brought up. So looking at your equivalent market price, is it correct to say that if all the assumptions are correct, and I'm going to reiterate something I said at the beginning, this whole thing, it's what we value that front building at is absolutely critical to how we look at this opportunity. But is it correct to say with your equivalent market price that if we could find a market rate unit for $610,000, a 2-bedroom, at that price or less, then we should forget this option and go buy down that market rate unit at 610 or less. But if it's over 610, then you're more driven toward this being something to look at.
That's correct. And so I was trying to distill that all the way down to, what does this number sound like to you? And there's people on the island that could respond to that.
So take, for example, Surfside Cross. If you said that is going to go forward and you said, I accept what the developers say the pricing is going to be for units, they're saying their condo product at a 2-bedroom is $650. So that sort of, that might be a comparison point.
So when sorry, thank you. Is this a good idea?
So, if I were the king of Nantucket, I would say, okay, I've got some land in the rear. It could be recreational land. I could, decide that I'm going to make it, expanded workforce or expanded seasonal housing. Again, that costs money. But I have something. I have something to plan around. Okay. I can do, we have these small units. Maybe I can integrate, there's maybe a senior need, and there's some first floor units, and they're, ADA accessible, and it's hard to develop senior units, and so I have them. Okay. What is the intrinsic value of that? Again, who am I to say? I just know these opportunities don't come up a lot.
Thank you.
Can somebody speak to the assumptions that were made in analysis 3, the rents for the 1-bedroom units at $2,100 and $2,459 per month?
Any 1-bedroom renters here? I'm not the best person to answer that question. Is there anybody?
Those are more in line in my professional experience with 2 or, I guess, a 2-bedroom unit. Not 3 bedrooms anymore. Although a few years ago it was, and that's what brings me to this question is what's the sensitivity of this analysis if the actual rents are going to be 10% less or 20% less, what does that do to our ability to cover this debt? The debt service coverage ratio is only 1.2 to begin with. And I think that these are some pretty aggressive estimates for what the rates are going to be. Has anybody looked at that, or what debt would be supported if we can't get these units all rented? 28 units rented at more than $2,100 a month for 1-bedroom.
It's a very easy analysis for me to run. I didn't do the sensitivity, and I can't do it in my head. But I can give you that. I can give you that sensitivity analysis. again, it's a really important point because, you know, this is leveraged. So if you're getting less, it's, you know, your equity is going down, you know, by a multiple. So, you know, all of these assumptions are important. Again, not knowing what the availability of you know, units are on the market, I just have to do some market research.
Right. So one of the things that we asked the proponents of the next article that we're going to hear about, we asked them to project costs out into the future, 5 and 10 years. Do we have that here? I apologize, I haven't fully digested this. We only got it at 12:30.
Yes, if you fully digested it, you'd be speaking. I'm not sure I fully digested it. You know, in putting this together, you know, I'm making the best assumptions that I can, okay? So is $150,000 the right number? You know, I didn't necessarily say that's a dead on 2019 number, and in 60 months at 2.5% escalation, it's gonna be, so I didn't.
Not the renovation cost, excuse me, the ongoing cost to the town for anything. I mean, is your assumption that you're gonna find some professional management company who's gonna take it over?
Yeah, so let me be really clear on this point. I think it's critically important that the assumption of the town is that this is going to be RFP'd out to a, you know, private or not-for-profit entity, to a non-municipal entity. The town may be a lender, okay? The town may lend money in, you know, be able to get paid back, but it's not performing. And so the ownership entity would be, you know, assume it goes out for RFP and people respond, that risk is on the ownership entity because the town would not own it. The loan would not be in the town's name, it would be in the private or not-for-profit owner's name. Thus the obligation.
I see. So in your analysis, the acquisition cost, the town portion of the acquisition and development cost that you've identified here, that's the only cost to the town for the life of the project?
Correct. Correct.
So I guess the follow-up to that is, did you compare the rent assumptions that you made here to what the 3 applicants for the 6 Fairgrounds Road project assumed they would be able to rent market units for?
I didn't. I can. Okay. Again, it's a very good question.
It's a great question.
These are important questions because you're right. My assumptions on these things, you know, greatly impact obviously what the model says. Right. Mm-hmm. You know, I will say, you know, it's assuming an operating cost of, you know, $8,000 per unit per year. So 50 units, that's $400,000, which is, you know, with Nantucket's low taxes, but high utility bills. So I did go through the operating side. But your point about doing a very, you know, kind of a quick check against Fairgrounds is a really good idea, both on the operating cost as well as the rent.
On the rent side, right? Because if nobody believes that they can get these rents, first of all, we're not going to qualify for the portion of the financing that we need to support, but we're not also likely to find an operator.
Absolutely, you're right.
I have a question. In your analysis, do we account for the loss to the town or the property taxes and the rooms tax? And what is that number?
Did not. This entity would be paying taxes. I had assumed it would be paying at a commercial rate. It's affordable housing, so it doesn't make nearly as much money as the hotel. Mm-hmm. So again, that's a calculation that's doable.
Tucker, do you have that?
Yeah, I don't have the net answer, like the projection of what it would be paying in the manner that Kevin was describing, but I understand the current owners pay just under $51,000 a year in real estate property taxes collectively, and the what is paid in terms of room occupancy tax, the local portion, it was 212,000 in 2018.
Well, but over the 5 years that the property's out of commission, it's $1 million. That needs to be added to the cost of the project.
You know, again, I don't want to speculate too much, but one opportunity potentially to mitigate that, and your point is dead on, is, you know, my sense is that people want to operate in full seasons, and, you know, I personally would try and make an agreement that we will do it in November of, and then they can continue to operate until that time, and it would be a coordinated transaction. Again, I'm not sure we could get those terms, but it feels like there could be a discussion around it. But again, your point is exactly right. I mean, the meals tax, frankly, you're changing use away from, you know, a use and, you know, a nice tax source for the town.
Well, I mean, if it's sold as a boutique hotel, it would increase in value and pay more taxes, both property taxes and rooms tax.
Right.
Not sure that's the best use, just a comparison.
Yeah, and these are the hard questions, right? Because again, it's, you know, what's the need versus, you know, we want SHI, and, you know, so unfortunately, it's not, you know, one is greater than two, or one is less than two. But trust me,
not.
So let me just say, a lot to digest, very good questions. I'm happy to follow up on, you know, any other questions that people may have, you know, through Tucker. And, you know, and again, I think everyone's leaving this room that's specific to this topic saying, let's try and get our hands around 12 million.
In all fairness, you didn't have a lot of time to pursue it, prepare this whole project presentation, so.
Well, Tucker and I met last Tuesday. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you for recognizing that, Peter. I mean, I wanted to thank the committee for the opportunity to bring something that only came to us relatively recently for this type of discussion, and, you know, and the types of questions that were brought up today are exactly the type of thing that we were hoping to hear, so that we can, you know, further analyze this and report back to you on some of the things that were mentioned here. So again, this is a complex project. There's no question about it. But I think it bears or is worthy of investigation wherever we, you know, end up on. So.
Tucker, to that end, do you have the resources to do the level of detail that's necessary for people to understand whether this is a good investment for the town or not? If I compare it to my work life, we had teams of people who would do extensive analysis for any investment over a certain level. So, and without that analysis, everyone's going to say, well, do we take a good faith leap and say, well, we don't really know, the numbers are a little bit squishy, but we have to decide by this day.
Yeah.
So, do you have the resources to get the analysis done?
Thank you very much for that question. So we're the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is, you know, voted to financially support consulting work that may help answer some of those questions. We're fortunate to have some folks affiliated with the island who have a real expertise in this area, who have connected us to others with expertise who we can contract on, you know, highest and best and realistic value for, say, the front building. That work still needs to happen. We've not, frankly, been, we haven't wanted to spend the money, given it's public money, without having a little greater certainty with the owner of the project that the deal will be there if everything checks out and votes happen and so forth. So that's happening real time to have a firm understanding with them of, you know, that the opportunity would be there if everything does check. So we're poised to engage the folks. I think that can maybe not answer every last question, but certainly some of the big ones. And you know, honestly value the expertise of this group and the questions that were brought up today, which help drive us to, you know, hopefully get to that place where we can all make an intelligent decision about it. Again, if this was only about housing, I'm not sure I'd be standing up here sort of advocating for the housing piece, if you will. This has to have value to us beyond the housing for me to look anyone like straight in the face and say, hey, this is something we really should do. So
how do you get to that point? It's one thing to determine whether 12 million is the right number or the wrong number. There's obviously alternative uses, and how do you, and this is great. I think, you know, we can wrap our heads around the housing stuff, and just as you said, if this were a deal that only had these numbers, it's pretty straightforward to analyze. But we're looking at $12 million that we all recognize is a little squishy, and is dependent upon what kinds of uses. So how do you drive, or your group drive that portion of this discussion and analysis, so that, you know, not only our committee, but, you know, the voters, you know, and the residents of the town feel comfortable that, you know, there's a high probability that this number can be achieved?
I've been connected with a firm that you're going to get some information. This group will get some information about immediately following this meeting. But folks who specialize in the evaluation of properties, like from a commercial standpoint and so forth. Again, they can, I think, help give a very real number to the value of the front building, for example, or the value of the rear portion, etc. They may reconfirm some of what is contained in the housing analysis. They're not going to tell the community, you absolutely should do that, like, instead of that. And that's above my pay grade. I think what Libby has talked about, if this were to go forward, you know, a work group, that is representing a wider range of constituencies in the determination of, you know, as a community, how would we want to use that front building? But I mean, I can't make that decision.
So you seem to be suggesting that it's likely that we will go into town meeting without knowing what the use. So, you know, people have spoken, obviously we all know this, about different town uses. You know, does that fall into the class of most likely use? And if so, how do we evaluate that? Because that's yet another commitment of town resources. This presumably is this $12 million is presumably a private resource. Non-housing. So if it's a town expenditure, how do we get that out and on the table? And if it's not a town expenditure, you just outlined an avenue that you're pursuing as far as that goes.
I mean, I don't know that I have the answer to, you know, can we determine by town meeting what is the highest and best use that the community feels is for that building? I mean, I'm happy to participate in helping to steer that discussion, but I feel that is something that involves representatives from this group and administration, other parts of the town.
Now, Tucker, if we're gonna look at it as something the town could use, it has to be something that would alleviate another cost.
Correct, exactly.
So that would be the only way. And the other thing, don't ever use the word free land, because there's really no such thing as free land.
No, and that's the point I want to make is, for example, fairgrounds, if you look at the financial pro forma, there isn't anything for land. Stations, there was nothing for land, but someday, a long time
Land
ago.
can be sold, so it's never free.
Yeah, it can be sold and it was bought.
Right.
Tucker, just
Yeah.
one last, there's no reason why we couldn't sell the front building.
You could sell the front building.
Right,
For $12,000.
Yeah.
right, or whatever number comes up as a,
Yeah, but if somebody buys it for $4 million, it doesn't work.
correct,
So that's,
correct.
Right. Yeah. No, and that's what, if we were to engage this group I've mentioned, they might say, highest and best is sell this, you're gonna get
Get your money
X
back,
offers
right.
for the, for this sort of use in that location. But again, does the town want to retain it strategically or not? I think, part of the interest generally in from citizens within the community, I think looking at something like this is the idea of, are there opportunities to repurpose existing construction to meet the need that we have around housing, and are we in some ways willing to pay some premium for doing that, going that route versus putting out town land and more in the Six Fairgrounds model? Because the Six Fairgrounds model is going to be the least expensive way for us to create housing. $52,000 a unit essentially, if you include the land cost.
Okay, any other questions? Great. Kevin, nice job. Thank you very much.
Excellent questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Wooden, did he depart? Are you prepared to go in his stead?
Say a couple words. Just to keep the time. Again, my name is Rick Atherton. Tobias and I had this idea, along with others, we're not the only ones, to bring this article forward. And I think I've mentioned before to this committee that my perspective may be slightly different than Tobias's, but I think we both agree that one of the driving forces is the fact that 40Bs are a big problem when they arrive and disrupt the neighborhood. And I, for one, and I think lots of our constituents, don't want that to happen again. And so I think a lot of your discussion for the prior issue and this issue has to have a good understanding of what's coming down the line and what's going to impact the SHI list. You may all have it clocked up here. It's not simple that we can find on a spreadsheet someplace every day by going to the town website. But the story goes that the Richmond units are going to give us 2 years of safe harbor, at least that's what I hear. And they should be approved within what, 6 weeks, 9 weeks, something like that. That gives us 2 years, and hopefully no one comes along for a 40B between now and then. I guess that could happen, but let's assume it doesn't. Then we're looking at, in terms of annual safe harbor, to the 3rd year down the road and beyond that. We know that there are other units that are going to be approved, and what we understand is when all those units, including the fairgrounds and other units coming from Housing Nantucket and other sources, we're going to be very close to the 10% about 5 years from now. So to me, the risk is that at some point in that process, we're exposed to a 1-year safe harbor issue. And I think the town folks have told us clearly they don't support concentrated, dense mid-rise developments in neighborhoods. So the article was designed to provide the opportunity not to do that. So if we had 30 million or some other number available, we could purchase individual existing housing units at a cost and purpose them for shy eligible rental properties. I think one way to look at this is like an insurance policy. This isn't a situation where you have to be all in on day one. You may never have to use any of the $30 million at all, as opposed to the prior project. Once you're in there, you're in. Here, if we need it, you may come to a situation in the town where they need 5 units to complete the 1-year safe harbor routine. And if we approve this, that would be available. The town could act in relatively short order to acquire them, put them on the list, and we'd have a safe harbor year. If we needed more, that's possible. We may only need 2 units. But I think that's an important way to look at this article. It's not just about the money. It's about neighborhoods. And hopefully the town as a whole is willing to consider the expenditure of money to make sure neighborhoods are not impacted the way the South Shore Road neighborhood is right now. So that's sort of my introduction. Tobias is the numbers guy and has his own personal perspective on some of the policy issues involved.
I thought you were the numbers guy.
Pardon?
I thought you were the numbers guy.
I can hardly read the screen. You hand me the numbers and I'll read them.
Great, thanks, Rick. So, you know, I thank you again to everyone for, and especially to Stephen Morey for helping put together this spreadsheet in more detail. Is definitely very, very helpful. So for everybody kind of in the audience who wasn't here, hasn't heard about this, basically what I'm trying to accomplish is what would a program have looked like if it were to take effect January 1st, 2018. So it's kind of a retrospective of what it would have looked like. So I went through a list of about 100 homes that sold last year, anywhere between 1.4 million and 750,000. So like these are real homes: 16 Whaledale, 2 Evergreen, 9 Equator, 16 Pine, 64 Hooper Farm, 35 Friendship, just to name a few. And there were some others that I would have considered very nice as well. So what I did was I picked 11 properties in total, and I focused on properties that either had 2 units on them already or the ability to add a 3rd unit, tertiary dwelling. The idea through this program would be that, you know, all of the units would count towards the shy list, but only some of them have a, you know, permanent deed restriction on them. So it provides an opportunity for housing for other purposes for the town. If the town needs staffing and whatnot, those purposes are there available. Some of the kind of the changes to the article as we've been thinking about. Last conversation we had, there was a conversation about purchasing deed restrictions. I met with Sarah Alger and incorporated some language that I have shared to provide that as an opportunity within the scope of this article. Another element, I met with Brian Turbot, and we talked about the bonds being tax exempt under housing, and so we're recommending anywhere between defining affordable as between 30 and 200% AMI. And that gives us flexibility, to address, you know, what really, you know, Cliff, what you mentioned earlier is really affordable. It's maybe not 100%, maybe it's 60%, but also if the town wants to hire someone and we need to put them in rental housing until they can purchase this home, all the way up to 200%. So it gives the town flexibility overall. So I can walk through this in detail if you'd like and answer any questions, but to summarize the kind of total cost for improving the units and the purchase price, and this includes the land, is about $15 million. And that works out to about $610,000 per unit.
Isn't that the number?
Yes.
The threshold?
So another element we, Rick and I have talked about is having gone through the financials and realized that we could execute this program for significantly under $30 million. We'd like to change kind of the motion of the article to reduce it down to $20 million because we think that would be more appropriate. So please stop me at any point if you have questions, but to kind of go through the capital expenses. So this is based on these current individual units. So they're based on what some of those conversion costs would be needed for those actual dwellings, including maybe some sewer, connection fees, water, contingency. And so those are kind of your upfront capital expenses. So kind of on the rent side, we have 25 units.
25 units after you
Yeah,
purchased 11 and then constructed 10 new units on lots that have the ability to build a second dwelling or a third dwelling.
exactly, or they're already a duplex and you have to make them a third. So for numbers' sake, we laid out kind of what the rents would be for 80, 100, and 120%, and we did about a third of each of those, 32%, 35%, and then here are kind of the units and what their rents are. So we're projecting about $685,000 in potential rent per year.
There's 25%, 80% AMI, but you get shy credit for all 25 units?
Yes, that's correct. So under a rental program, all of the units, at least 25% of them, have to be under 80% AMI for them all to count towards the shy list. I want to just go back to assumptions. I'm just going to show you some of the other pages because I'm missing it here. Maybe I can go across. That's why. Aha. Sorry, I usually use a Mac. They're better. So just kind of a, one of the exercises we did is what would be the forecast. So what would the total cost be for this program, including operation and maintenance over 5 and 10 years. So versus that 15 million kind of upfront, a total cost of this program, assuming that the town were to completely run it by itself. Obviously, as the last article was discussed, it would make much more sense to have this program run independently by another entity. So the town wouldn't incur certain costs that are associated with the town running a program like this. But we wanted to show a worst case scenario. We factor in vacancy loss, rental escalation, those pieces. Financing, the town would essentially borrow money. We chose 4%. And so the total cost of the program, the debt per service is $874,000 per year. So, we have some operating expenses. We included what the cost of removing those units from the tax roll would be. Sewer, electric, insurance, administrative fees, marketing the units to make sure they're rented appropriately, DHDC monitoring, kind of all those pieces, and then a little escalation. So that works out to about $158,000 per year. So next I want to go to kind of our operating income. And just going to slide this over slightly. So this is just kind of your first couple years. But you can see, year one, kind of what your rental income is, your loss for vacancy, your operating expenses. And so your kind of, total net operating income is $492,000. So kind of one of the ways of looking at this, program is, what is kind of the cost? Sorry, let me get all the way down. So, in total, your cash flow after your debt service here on the bottom is, you're in the whole $400,000 per year. And so if you want to look at that generally, what does a program cost like this, including your operating expenses, including purchasing the properties, the land, managing it? In a worst case scenario, you're talking $400,000 per year to get 25 units to achieve that safe harbor and execute this program all within 1 year in 2018. So looking out forward, we've got about 11,000 properties on Nantucket, so you're talking $35 per property in additional tax liability per property. So, last time there was a kind of a conversation about what it costs in cup of coffee. Jason, let's say it's $5. So let's say you get 7 coffees, and we get to meet our shy list, and we don't have to be concerned about 40 Bs going on into the future. So that's kind of my summary. I'd love to answer any questions you have, and I really appreciate, again, Stephen's effort in putting this together with me, and also a lot of feedback I received from you and other folks in the community. So thank you.
Big improvement. Thank you. On your numbers. Good job, Stephen. Good job, bias.
I guess I am a number guy now, but it's mainly Stephen. It's mainly Stephen.
It's more clear.
Ask you a question about the interest rate. Considering we have low interest loans for septics and we have sewers and everything else, where does the state stand? Have you talked to anybody about getting 1% loan, because then your debt service is cut?
Yeah, I wanted to present a worst case scenario.
Okay.
I could add in the state giving us money or some hoopla, but I thought this was a fair representation to say it's going to cost $400,000 per year to run this program. It's $35 per person to make sure we're maintaining a program to make sure we have safe harbor.
What would you be using if you were doing an analysis in terms of percentage on the loan?
4.5 and 20 years versus 4 and 30, more than likely. But as when I spoke to Tobias and Rick, I told them that the amortization would be, at the time it's permanently borrowed, would be modeled based on our financial policy. So I don't think 30 is horrible to use in this for their amortization, or 4%. I mean, it's reasonable for this. It may change based on what the timing and how our overall debt structure looks like at the time we permanently borrow. So that would change slightly, but I did tell them that this isn't out of line.
So Tobias, you did the work looking at if it was 2018 and we can turn back time. Have you taken a look just recently out of curiosity as to what's out there? And do you have 11 properties that you would go get tomorrow if you had this funding?
Well, I'm gonna try to answer that coyly, which is that I don't want to choose the properties. I'd like a team of people who are qualified to choose properties.
Sure.
I think one of the nuances of this program is it's kind of looking ahead to say, in giving the town the flexibility to enter the market at an appropriate time. So, arguably you could say there's a 20% differential, depending on whether we're at the top of the market or in a lull of the market. And so this gives the town some flexibility to purchase properties. There are, I was looking at, about half of these homes were summer homes. They're nice houses with new roofs, upgraded heated systems, hardwood floors. So I felt that, kind of looking at the current market, there was a number of properties kind of in this price range for purchase.
2 questions. Management fee is 0. So one question is, how would this be managed? And the second question really goes to the issue of the town crowding out buyers who, so now all of a sudden we go into the market and start competing with people that might be at the threshold where they could actually purchase these houses for themselves. So you're, to some extent, taking existing not to some, you're taking existing properties and repurposing them as compared to the Nantucket Inn, where we're actually adding a totally different use into the market. So,
yeah, that's a great question. So, how I would answer that is, one, I put together the scenario based on 2018 as if the town entered the market all at once. And in reality, the town would never want to do that. We'd want to be, purchasing, anywhere between, 1 and 3 units per year over a 4-6 year period, in relationship with how we need to respond to the shy list. And so in my mind, since about half these units were already summer homes, we're not exerting a huge amount of force on the private market for houses at this price point. And then ultimately, the town isn't going to be able to purchase a home above what its assessed value is. And so I felt like that kind of restriction, is going to give, there's if we're entering the market and we're purchasing 2 homes a year, is that any different than anybody who comes here and says, I want to buy 2 homes on Nantucket in any given year? That happens all the time. So it's kind of my response to that.
Follow up, may I, Mr. Chairman? What I've heard is that in the aggregate, your houses occupied by year-round people we like to think of as Nantucket residents have been going down compared to purchases by investors over time. So that may not be true, but that's what I've heard. So that by hopefully buying, if we're lucky, we're buying from investors, not from year-round people in the first place. So I don't think if we're able to do that, and in the aggregate that's already what's happening, that it's going to be a real burden. I'd just like to mention one other thing that someone mentioned to me today. This article also talks about an override. And, in some ways, if we end up meeting the article in insurance ways for 2 or 3 units a year, the debt service related to that is not very much money. I think if you're looking 3 years down the road, you wouldn't need an override. That kind of service could be tucked into the town's regular budget, or the affordable housing budget, which is getting practically $1 million a year anyway. So I just wanted to mention that to you.
So just to be clear, it is it would be a crowding out, Rick. If of younger people who want to come in and buy, even if it's a summer home. I mean, the town's coming in and competing with that group of people, and that's a legitimate concern. I mean, it's not there's no judgment associated with it. It's just
we're also competing with investors who are here as well. So I was just pointing out in the aggregate, I think that's what's happening. And if we're I would understand if we're in there buying 30 houses in the first year, and that was the way the program would be administered. I can't imagine, because this article is written to give the authority to the Board of Selectmen to implement it after they figure out what the best course of action is, that they would ever want to do that. There isn't going to be a need, at least for 3 years. And then you'd only have a need if there were no other shy eligible houses coming onto the list. So that's not likely to be the issue we face.
So how do we exactly borrow the money? We don't have to borrow the money until we buy a house, but we don't know when we're going to buy these houses.
Borrowing the money, I don't think is a problem. Brian has the ability to go into the market and buy borrow on a short-term basis. He's probably, I'll speak for him, he should speak for himself. He's probably in twice a year anyway. He's borrowing money to the fire station for this project and that project. He could add a couple $100,000 on, or a couple million on it. You never know the difference.
All this from a banker? Would you hang on?
David, I just want to point out that Matt's got his hand raised.
I have a question. So you went backwards and you looked at how many houses you looked at. Do you know, did they sell?
These are all sold houses.
And who did they sell to?
It's honestly a mix. There's some that were purchased year-round, some were purchased as investments.
Right. Because I think the crowding out that you're talking about, David, goes the other direction. I think the crowding out that's happening because off-islanders are coming in, and that's the externality that's wiping our market out.
Yep.
The reason we have fewer homes now than we did 10 years ago, year-round homes, is because the islanders are competing with a lot more affluent people from off-island. And I think this is an opportunity to turn that back a little bit.
And to expand on that a little further, I graduated in 2007, watched 2008 happen, and the market decline, and then through what was the housing needs assessment program?
Workforce housing needs.
Yeah, through that kind of analysis of year-round housing, kind of what happened from 2008 to roughly 2000, I want to say 15 was that analysis. Thanks, Ann. You saw about 500 homes that were year-round homes that people at the height of the market had overextended themselves. They went under. They were renting the back cottage to someone. They were living with their family there. They couldn't pay their mortgages. They went under. They moved off island. Everybody who was waiting to purchase homes on Nantucket, their dream home, came into Nantucket, bought at the bottom of the market, and we lost a lot of year-round people to more summer people. Whether that's good or bad or indifferent, that's something that happened. And so kind of looking forward and trying to learn a lesson from that, this article gives the town the financial ability to enter a market in response to learning through our history of what happened over the last 10 years.
So would you address the management portion, please?
Thank you, David. Let me just go. So these management fees, Stephen, you're going to have to help me out here about how these line items move across. But in talking to Ann, like the DHCD monitoring, that's to make sure the units are SHI eligible, and the 25% of the units are going to have to be on the SHI list, that those are covered. We have kind of repairs, maintenance, materials, labor, kind of per unit, $500 per unit per month. That's definitely in my mind a bit of a management fee. Then there's also an administrative fee of $250 per unit per month, and so that kind of covers it. And I don't exactly understand why the kind of moving across it's at zero, but Stephen, maybe you could help me with that.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to disclose that I'm not like co-signing on this project. I did help with the formatting of the numbers, and I think you did a great job with this. There's no management fee, I think, because there's no professional manager. It's assumed that the town is using existing employees, and maybe there's some factor for additional payroll to supplement DPW budget or whomever's going to be maintaining these properties. But to the extent that a professional manager is needed or new payroll is needed, it should show up in that management line. So, probably the operating expenses are understated.
I mean, I'm personally less concerned about what the actual number is, more what the philosophy is in terms of managing these properties. I mean, I have heard that it will be very difficult to get a professional manager to do this because it requires a business model that most professional management organizations don't have. And it's not like these aren't going to require some attention. I mean, it doesn't just happen, as you know, when the drain backs up. Who are you going to call? Kind of thing. So I personally would like to hear what your thoughts are and it sounds like you're depending upon the town to do the management of these, and what kind of conversations you've had with where it would reside and who would be responsible for it.
So I had a couple of conversations with Ann kind of about this, and I was wondering, Ann, could you comment a little bit on kind of potentially, when I talked with Ann a while back about this, I looked at it and said, ultimately it's a few units per year that we'd be bringing on board. And so, could the town write an RFP to get a private individual to manage, 3 properties that have 9 units on them? Like, to me, that seemed feasible based on this kind of the skills we have here on the island, and pay the wages that are necessary to kind of to cover that. Also, the town could put together an RFP to have a private management company manage all these units. That was, to answer that, David, that's kind of my response.
Quick question, Tobias. You've talked about that it might be 2 or 3 or 4 units per year. I mean, you don't really know how. So why do you need $20 million? Why not fund it at 3 or 4 or 5 million? Ask for 3 or 4 or $5 million and prove the concept and come back for more money.
Yeah. So my response to that would be, I often, having been in government before, it's, you come up and you say, oh, here's a program. Are you going to come ask me again for funds? We're asking right now. I'm not saying all these funds would be used for this, but would be used, but they, that's my response.
Just a big appropriation.
Again, it's, $400,000 a year, $35 a person.
Would you consider expanding the language in your article to include something like along the lines of, or other housing oriented activities as the Board of Selectmen may deem appropriate from time to time?
Could you repeat that, David?
Expanding the language that basically gives more latitude to the board to expend these funds, perhaps not directly in this program, but in other programs where there may be housing opportunity that's not, you guys have got a very specific targeted program. But expanding it so that there's the Board of Selectmen have more flexibility in the application of these funds as it relates to housing. I'm not suggesting that it go to solid
Maybe
waste
with the
or something.
stipulation that all the proceeds have to go towards creating shy eligible units.
Yeah.
I mean that I think is the general intent.
But yeah, I would say generally yes. The kind of the two kind of pillars I look at is A, that all the units are being counted towards the shy list, and B, that it is in a mixed site capacity, at least some degree. So one of the questions came up in conversations with folks is like, what is mixed site? And to my mind, it's no more than 3 or 4 units on a given property. So you might have a 2-acre property, you might divide it in half and have 4 units on that original parcel. So it gives some sort of flexibility, but it also doesn't give the town flexibility to go and outright development. It's for pre-existing property. And that's the intention. Say that again?
Do you need things?
Yeah, I'd love to. Because ultimately this is something we're all trying, we're all working to try to solve housing together. So we're trying to bring everybody in together to look at this.
Yes, Ann Kuspa, Director of Housing Nantucket. And this is our business model. We have 37 scattered site properties around the island. We would be very interested in responding to an RFP to manage these properties. It would easily fold into our existing business model. We have operational procedures and whatnot that I think it would be great because it supports our mission, which is to create affordable housing opportunities for islanders. So just strengthens our community development organization, and we would be interested to do that. I'm capable.
Great, thanks.
I just have a question about the implementation of this.
Mm-hmm.
So you're thinking that there'll be some sort of neutral group who will choose the houses,
mm-hmm.
and then the select board would vote on each individual house as it comes up? Like, describe that process?
Yeah. So when we drafted this language, we wanted to be flexible to give the board the tools it needed. So it could be the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It could be another group that the board sets up. Obviously, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has a lot of flexibility to be able to do some of these things we're talking about. So ideally, they in some capacity would be selecting these properties. And then whether, I can't imagine there being more than 2 or 3 at any one time presented to the Board of Selectmen. I just don't think the capacity is really there, or that kind of flow in purchasing properties exists. But I would imagine, kind of that scenario taking place. The Affordable Housing Trust Funds, they identify, let's say, 2 or 3 properties. They say, we'd like authorization to purchase these specific properties. And then the board comes and says, yes, we give you authority to to spend those funds essentially.
And then if you look at, so now I'm going to ask you to just look at a different scenario. So 25 units, the total cost over 5 years is $17 million plus the $11 million that it took, no, $17 million plus $15 million when they're renovated, right? So that's 32.
No.
No.
It includes it. Okay, that was my question. All right, so 17 million, we had that question, $17 million for 5 years for 25 units. How does that are available very quickly? Right, because I'm comparing this to the Nantucket Inn model, right? So the quickest availability of any of those units was the scenario in which we only got 29 units. We didn't take any state money.
I think it was 39.
Okay,
units.
39 units, 29 months.
Right.
No state money.
Yeah.
The cost to the town was scenario 3.
Right, it was similar.
It was a
cost
similar
was
cost.
similar,
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to understand. So probably that's not a question. It was more needing to know if the 5-year cost included the $15 million. Okay.
Any other separate questions?
So, folks, and yes, I just sorry, there may be still people watching or listening.
They're going to be fascinated by this. No, I feel like so it's correct that in here the assumptions are 25% of the units would be restricted at 80, the rest at offered at other income levels, and they would all count. And I think Tobias and I have talked about this a little bit. Preliminary conversations with DHCD, who's the arbiter of what goes on to our SHI list or not, indicate that I'm not sure that we can have scattered sites and only restrict 25% and have them all count. What they've indicated thus far is that it would basically be on a site-by-site basis. So in the case where you might have a primary house, a secondary house, and a tertiary apartment, you could restrict one of them at 80 and get the benefit of the SHI for all 3. But that's on an individual site basis, if that makes sense to the group.
What if there's like 2 lots next to each other? Could you combine those? Could they consider that one development?
I don't know the answer for sure, but normally they're looking at a single property for how they utilize the 25% formula, which isn't to say we can't work with them, see if there aren't opportunities given unique circumstances, if you will, here in Nantucket, but that's the preliminary answer they give us.
So if you can't, just following along, if you can't have all of them counted towards the SHI list, what kind of impact does that have?
Yeah,
go ahead.
So when I did this, I assumed that each parcel, these, I didn't assume. I looked at each parcel and said, okay, one of these on each, I'm buying 11 parcels, okay? They either have 2 or 3 units on them. On each parcel, I pick a unit. So I'm at, if there's 3, I'm at 30%. If there's 2 units, I'm at 50% of any given parcel. So I get 8 units at 80% AMI out of the 25.
But let's assume for a second that all of the units have to be 80%. So in that box up there, just change all the 80% numbers to the totals and make together 0, and we'll see what the effect is on the annual rent income.
I'm not following this, I'm sorry.
So just use your mouse and go up under 80%, that first column. So start at 2.
Put 5 in.
Make that a 5. And then going across to the right, make those zeros. want to do the same thing, make the 4 at 12.
Yep. Keep going. I'll do whatever you want. We're here.
Okay, make that an 8. Make the one you're on an 8.
Okay.
No.
Nope.
Oops, sorry. The 2?
Yeah,
Yeah.
make the 2 an 8.
And then delete the rest.
Yeah, make the others 0.
0.
Yeah, this is a good spreadsheet. Whoever else is working. You guys did a great job. I couldn't do this. Yeah, this is a lot of work when it is.
Okay,
gotta go to
one
the
more.
4.
Sorry. What? Oh, sorry. That 4. All right. Just learning how to use a PC. Yeah.
Then look, scroll down.
Sorry. What was the other piece you'd like?
I didn't change the numbers on the left.
It should be.
Should change the annual gross rent.
You know what? You know what it is, Stephen? Is
You put it in Excel, and it was in.
this is a CSV file. It's not the actual Excel file.
Got it. Well, I have access to your Google
Yeah.
Sheets,
Sorry.
so let me,
That was almost really cool.
Good having
Yeah.
a spy.
Can you just tell us the number?
Because you so
What did you call this? Neighborhood first or something?
Yeah.
Neighborhood first.
Is there some sort of a contingency or slush fund, because you're in the rental business, the tenant leaves, the tenant goes, there's maintenance, there's no rent that month,
yeah, there's a
so who pays that? Where does that money come
there's a
from?
vacancy.
There's an allowance of 5%.
Yeah. So you see here, there's a
Vacancy loss.
vacancy loss.
I might suggest you're going to have more than a collection loss greater than 0.
Say that again.
I would suggest you're
Yes.
going to have a collection loss greater than 0.
So we can. Great point.
It's de minimis. I'm just
Yeah.
pointing out that
Yeah.
you shouldn't assume that
Yeah.
everybody pays. And
Yeah. I don't know what that would be. Like.
hang on, Stephen. If you,
Yeah, if you can go back to the rent roll tab, I
Yep.
want to see what your gross potential rent is.
Sorry.
658.
So you're at 685. If everything goes to 80%, it drops to 532. So that's an extra $150,000 a year, or $750,000 over 5 years. So that's
Okay.
about what we're talking about.
Great.
And so can I didn't think I followed you on that assumption. So you're assuming that all of the units have to be rented at under 80%?
Yeah, we're assuming. I think Tucker alluded to a scenario where it's possible that DHCD requires that all of the units are 80%.
Even though
AMI.
it's on a mix.
I think what he's saying is it's possible that they would allow one unit in a 2 or 3 unit property to be 80% and all units would count. But it's also possible
Okay, yeah.
on a particular site that all units must be 80%. So what we just did was look at what's the annual gross potential rent if everything's at 80%, and it's $532,000 or $150,000 less. So that's what it adds to the cost annually.
So that's your worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Because you had to do everything.
it's everything.
Right,
So we
over
know at
10
the
years,
bottom-
you're looking at another $1.5 million. You know,
Thank you for clarifying.
Hi, Christy Ferrantella. I was just wondering, with the last presentation, they were saying it would take about 1.5 years as the shortest goal to get lit on units on the shy list. How long would it take with this process to buy the land, do the LAU application, and get it approved by DHCD? Or would that be within 1 year to guarantee the shy list?
So it depends on like how many units you get, and like if we bought a unit tomorrow, how long do you think within a year? A year?
A year, maybe even more.
So it wouldn't help us get into safe harbor if it took over 1 year.
What Kevin said earlier there is this is the process to get units on the shy list takes a long time. So it's gonna take a long time for this to.
So it's looking forward. It's saying how do we get there when we need to get there, and so it's based on the assumption. This whole scenario is based on the assumption that we are in if the Richmond units come on board, we are in safe harbor. So then in 2 years' time, in theory, we'd have some of these units ready. to then meet the safe harbor.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and sorry.
One other thing, sorry. Just with regards to the 80% units being on scattered sites, I think what we were saying was, you were saying it would be all the 80% units would be clustered in one area, or the 80% would be amassed over the total number of properties.
Yeah, each.
But you could have the hundreds and the 120s still in your mix. They don't all have to be 80% to count. But what we were saying before was that they could be located on different properties. Like 25% of the units on one property have to be
Got it.
80%. So that's going to affect your numbers significantly.
Right, that was the original scenario. But Tucker's saying that potentially on a given site, DHCD might not like that. They might not like that 1 out of 3 units is 80%.
So if the assumption is that you're buying 11 different properties, is that correct? What DHCD, like the minimum number of 80% units you need to have is 11, the bare minimum.
Got it. So if there's 1 per parcel,
exactly,
then that would satisfy the
Yeah,
need.
yeah.
Okay, so that was the initial
Yeah.
scenario
Yeah.
that you projected. Okay. So that's good. We just saved $1 million.
Yeah.
$1.5 million.
Good job. We lost it, we gave it back. Thanks, Stephen.
That was quick.
Anybody out there that wants to comment?
Get back to the loan, so we're just gonna get an appropriation of $15 million, and we're gonna go up in the open market, we're not gonna bond it like we would a fire station, we're just gonna get a mortgage for each individual house as we go.
Brian's saying no.
No.
The general obligation bond, so we would do short-term debt, short-term bands based on the timing and permanent bond. That makes sense. It might be immediately, it might be 2 years from now.
And you would probably just roll it up in whatever general obligation financing you were doing.
We would roll it into whatever we were doing. Maybe part of a larger issue, more than likely, it's a very expensive issue. Well, that in and of itself. So.
Just take a chance for one comment. So I'll switch hats for Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Thank you for all the work that you did, Brian Sullivan. The spreadsheet's great. In concept, I love the idea because it's going to create more affordable housing. I think you touched base on some of the obvious challenges. Where the market is right now, it may take a little while to get the number of units. I like the concept of adding in the buy down opportunity into the language. I think that creates, a nice opportunity for the market. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund has sent to Finance Department language or requests for interest to see if there's any improved property out there that somebody might want to put towards this, with the anticipation when the article was originally written, in the hopes that we could get into deal flow pre-market and not have to compete, because the procurement process is not as easy as seeing something come on, making a bid, and then getting an appraisal. That part of it will become tricky when rubber meets the road. So hopefully once that does get issued, we'll start to hear about opportunities that could be acquired in hitting numbers that work. I like the concept of adding more houses in general that are affordable. I worry if we're using this as a tool specifically to try and meet 24 units within a year to meet safe harbor because of the trickiness of procurement. So I want to make sure that this is not that solution, but it is a solution towards creating affordable housing. So I commend the effort and the spreadsheet and the work that everybody's put into it.
I think Brian's point is really important, that this is not a tool that's going to be useful for getting us safe harbor. It might get us towards, it would get us closer towards the 10%, the ultimate goal, but not for that safe harbor.
In my general experiences, is that 490 number is likely going to come down based on the point that Matt made and others have said anecdotally. So it'll get us closer to the target in the long run.
Thank you.
Yeah, and like with that in mind, just one last comment, because I know it's getting late, is that this is when we talk about the environment, water quality, new buildings, this is designed to kind of address that. They're pre-existing units, And lastly, like, you know, when I kind of look at it, I see, you know, kind of the cost per unit plus construction at, you know, 600,000+. You're getting nice, like, 3-bedroom houses with trees growing in them already, and there's like a value in that, you know, versus like, you know, building new on a new site. Character is important.
Are there examples where this has been done in other communities?
That's a great question.
The world is large. I'm sure somebody's done it.
But you don't know.
Yeah, if you can tell me how to Google that, I'd love to know. Search that.
You're gonna have to be telling us how to Google it.
No, I'm being serious.
I think that's valid. I think that, you know, voters are going to want to know that this has been done before. It's not just a nice idea, but it can be implemented, and there's, you know, really maybe somebody to call to ask
There's
them how to do it.
it's a lessons learned approach to this, to know
Absolutely.
we did it and it was a smashing success.
Right, or we stumbled out the gates and, you know, 2 years later we fixed it.
I mean, there would only be a few communities where this could have possibly
We're not going to obviously take a vote on this tonight. I'd appreciate asking you guys to do a little bit of work on that. And the other thing that I'd come back to see if you would consider broadening the language to give a little bit more latitude to the Board of Selectmen on how the funds could be used.
Yeah. So could you just talk briefly, David, for a little bit more about like what that language would be, and I could take some notes.
It's just, I think as we talked that funds to be used here or at the discretion of the board to participate. Given how quickly this came upon us, there may be other scenarios that come upon us quickly, and it seems like if the select board has some latitude on how they use the funds for housing, and I don't think that, I'm perfectly comfortable with it being sort of an existing rather than a greenfield project.
Denver's
done it.
Oh, this is Detroit doing it too?
Denver launched a $10 million revolving affordable housing loan fund.
David, just to be clear, so in one of my conversations with Sarah was like, how big can we expand kind of the scope? And one of the thoughts was that the scope kind of needed to A, be mixed site and B, affordable. So as long as it's kind of within those parameters, I'm totally fine with whatever that language will be. And so I'll get something in
Thank you.
Great.
Anything else? Everybody's good? We're all good back here? Great. Peter, you're good?
I'm saving my time.
It will come.
It will.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Could you come up and identify yourself?
Oh, sure. My name's Jody. And, I don't know who the answers to ask you to, but might be more directed to Stephen. If you buy something that's not in zoning, how are you going to address zoning? To have that many people? Like, for example, are you only going to buy houses that are on town sewer and water? And what if you're buying a house
I
that's
just
a
want to
3-bed
be
septic?
clear. I tried to say it before. I'm not the proponent of this. I don't have anything to do with. I just helped him format the numbers so that we could better assess the project. I don't plan to implement it.
Great question. So all the units, are currently comply with the current zoning those parcels have.
So you're only going to buy properties that are like in R10 or something like that?
Have pre-existing zoning, yes.
So, and you said they have to have tertiary. There are only a couple of them that they have to allow a tertiary.
Some of them, yes. Because some of them are duplexes, so they already have that possibility. Some of them already have an apartment on them. Let me just give you the exact.
Is the question whether he's trying to do mini 40Bs that don't comply with zoning? Is that what your question is?
No, I just want to know how he's going to target what he was going to buy. For example, what I liked about the project or the proposal was that it seems like you could go all over the island, but you really can't. You're just saying you really have to stay in this corridor where we are now.
Tobias, you have a list of the properties you've identified. You might share it with Jill because it really is all over the island. I mean, some of them were out in Nantucket, I think. And anyway, they were all over the place.
I mean, town sewer and water. So then how are you going to get around the... I mean, I'm just wondering about failed septic systems and things like that, because those are usually a lot of these properties are like that.
Yeah, those are all very valid. I don't know if they were all on sewer.
Not all of them are, but within the you know, like within the advertisement for the property, it said like, you know, existing septic. I can send you the list of like what the properties were, but they like, you know, had the square footage to build an additional unit and had this, you know, septic capacity signed up. So they're not all sewer and water, but the majority of them are.
We're getting kicked out.
Yes.
Great.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
What normally does that?
Second.
Thank you all very much. Thank you all for persevering tonight. Tobias, thank you very much.
USBs.